Thank you for listening to this quick sample of FU, a novel of Foxton University. Copyright 2025 by John DeCoco and Vulpine Media. All rights reserved. No portion of this recording may be reproduced without the expressed written permission of the author.
FU, a novel of Foxton University by John DeCoco. Kismy Enderby was feeling a tingle between her legs. What the hell, she thought. She was shaking and glanced around to see if anyone noticed. She reached for her iced coffee too fast and spilled it across her lab table. Rob, a fellow researcher, heard the splash and, turning, noticed her flushed face. "Hey, Kiz, are you okay?" She stared straight ahead, took a deep breath, and answered, "Yeah, I'm good. Just turned my head too fast. That's all. Yep, just that. Whew. You sure you're okay? I'm going down to the caf. Do you want anything?" "Thanks. I'm just fine." Her neck was bright red, and she was squeezing her legs together as beads of sweat began ambling down between her breasts. Kismy Enderby, fourth-year biochem PhD student, straight from the meeting with department head Ted Neuter, had just opened the packet of new materials. When she unzipped the first baggie, there was a sweet aroma. With tweezers, she gently extracted a leaf. Small, deep green, with serrated edges. "Like spearmint," she mused. She slipped it between the halves of a glass slide and placed it under the lens. Kismy studied it a while, made some notes, and took another look. The leaf began to emit tiny bubbles from the tweezer dent. That's when her pelvis sent a signal. "I think I better get out of here. But I have to show Ted first." Neuter, her mentor, was across the room, and she called him over. "Ted, this is from that first packet you gave me. It seems to be letting off a little steam." The professor came and bent over Kismy's microscope and looked at the specimen. It seems like you got the little rascal quite agitated." "I didn't do anything," she said, squeezing her legs together, "except put it in a slide." Kismy absent-mindedly ran a finger over the surface of the packet. Tiny hairs on her arm and neck began to rise. "Good God, I'm getting wet." And then she felt the room closing in. Two techs walked by the lab door. Ted saw her startle. "Kismy, what's up?" "I feel—" The dual sensations made it hard to focus. "The room feels stuffy, crowded." Ted asked, "How do you feel now?" as he watched the two walk down the hall. That kind of stopped. Am I losing it here in front of Ted? Neuter started tapping into his iPad. "You mean the crowdedness, right? Maybe take a break. Go out and get some fresh air." You think? Actually, that's exactly what I need. Am I panting? Go out, take a little walk. Come back and let me know if these sensitivities recur. All reactions, plant and human, are relevant. Let me know about anything else you see or experience. Anything." As soon as he left, she veered straight for the women's room. God, where's this coming from? The night before, Neuter arrived back in Foxton from gathering samples in the tiny nation of Guiapo, in the western Amazon headwaters. When he strode in this morning, he called Kismy, Rob, and Rex, his three most talented PhD students, into his office and handed each a bundle from a well-traveled backpack. He explained that his return had been delayed by circumstances beyond my control. "I'm sure you have a lot of questions, but everything will be clarified in time. This is a new, high priority. If you can, I'd like to spend at least about 50% of your time on these samples for the next couple of weeks." In the first several days of study, all the researchers found that a particular set of samples were triggering their nervous systems. They ran the pieces through several tests and found that exposure to these samples gave everyone a sort of light buzz, reducing stress and anxiety. All of the group eventually experienced a somewhat heightened sense of the presence of others, like Kismy did. Yet no one mentioned anything like Kismy's other reaction. In the biolab, they started informal experiments among themselves, seeing if they could determine when people were about to enter a room or walk down the hallway or move around in adjacent rooms. As time went on, they improved their motion sensing. They named it the proximity effect. Neuter wondered. "Surprisingly, our people are only on the mellowness and proximity stuff right now. Wait till they hit the big one." The research team named the substance euphoric for internal reference. In the jungle where it grew, the Bon Bon people cultivated and worshipped it as Kandé. Within a few days, the researchers working with Euphoric became more open, cheerful, and cordial. Not only did it occupy half of many researchers' workdays, it quickly extended everyone's pet off-duty project. Of the several hundred samples from the South American expedition, the researchers would eventually work through them all. But samples of Euphoric, concentrated in parts of a certain tree, was arousing the most interest. It would eventually arouse almost everyone who worked with it. Within days, Kisme had been able to reproduce the proximity results in rats, monkeys, and fellow employees. On a whim, she ground some up and added it to the plant food of her almost dead office plant. The next day, it was standing quite erect. Kisme was named the lead researcher and was herself experiencing more than just relaxation and a proximity effect. The nerve endings in her inner thighs lit up frequently and seemed to be intensifying. Late on Friday of the second week, Kisme felt a flutter of light pulsations. She had to shift on her stool. Oh man, she thought, do I need a hazmat suit to work with this stuff? Let's focus on work here. Her body had other ideas. Ooh, she whispered, slightly bent, as she now had a couple of mini contractions. She grasped her workbench with both hands, rattling the glass beakers. Holy jeez! As quietly as she could, she flew into the hall, an erupting orgasm causing her to gasp and wobble. The unprovoked erotic thrumming continued at work, but lessened outside the lab. As far as she knew, she was alone with the arousal symptoms. She started bringing extra underwear to work. She wanted to ask her lab mates if any of them felt what she did, but couldn't think of a way to bring it up without sounding totally nuts. The more time the research team spent around Euphoric, the more sensual they did feel. Neuter noticed an increased amount of mild physical contact among staff, such as placing a hand on someone's back while looking over their shoulder, or touching a fellow colleague's arm during lunch, or more hugging at the slightest excuse. In any other setting, it might be perceived as unwanted touching. In room 301, it was most appreciated. Kisme found herself running her hand through her hair much more than usual. More nipples were on alert, and men hunched lower over their lab benches when uninvited erections sprouted. Morale was definitely high, and the casual flirting quotient was particularly elevated for such a studious community. The tipping point arrived one morning in the third week of the semester when Mike, a quiet PhD whose bench was across the lab from Kisme, started kissing his own hands, moaning loudly, his tongue intertwining with each finger in turn. Other researchers had their own urges. Mike's moans seemed to have triggered the room. Rex started hugging his knees and motorboating them. Mucci, turning her back to the group, began rubbing her breasts under her lab coat while humming "Tits and Ass" from a chorus line. Emilio shoved both hands down his pants and fell right into Mucci's rhythm with his rubbing. Professor Neuter entered room 301 at this moment and said, "Well, well." Kisme, whose hand had moved to sensuous circular orbits of her own bottom, said, "Mike did it first." She was startled at her outburst. The whole lab was in full blush. Emilio sang out, "No one loves me like I do," then immediately wished he hadn't, as several wide-eyed stares came his way. Everyone's breathing was accelerated, and they glanced around like frightened rabbits. Neuter raised his hands to calm them and said, "We're all scientists here. Let's address the evidence before us." Mike said, "I just had this overwhelming compulsion. I felt like I was outside myself and totally attracted to this steaming hunk that was me. I was so turned on." He wanted to shut up, but couldn't in time. "Jesus, me too," said Mucci, squeezing handfuls of her chest with delight. "I am loving my body. Loving it." Kisme, struggling to keep calm, tried to save them all. "Okay, listen. I've been feeling this for days, but no one else mentioned it. It has to be the euphoric. I feel as if I'm some sexual trance where I want to touch and be touched. I feel so randy, and this lab is really unsexy. So what the hell?" Neuter glanced around the room, observing his students' eyes, damp foreheads, alertness. The familiar tingling came over him, too, a soft, pleasant surge of sweetness. "I feel it too, people, and I felt it before. but I wanted to hear about it from you. You knew? Kisme asked in a tone both shocked and relieved. This effect, this arousal, was my biggest finding in the rainforest, Neuter said. It's why I was delayed getting back from my trip. The villagers exposed me to these effects. They even invited me to stay, but I wanted to really analyze this under pure lab conditions here. I'll tell you more later, when we have more data, but at this moment, I want to know if there are any specific triggers just now. Kisme said, well, just before Mike started, what he was doing, I was scratching some of the dried euphoric bark. Maybe I released something into the air? Neuter said, do it again. Let's see what happens. The group gathered around Kisme's bench, 50% worried that they couldn't withstand another shot of self-lust in professional company, and 95% hoped for a repeat. Kisme drew a metallic pick across a sample. A minty scent arose. There was a communal sigh, a long communal sigh. Mushi adjusted her bra. Mike adjusted his balls. Both of them took longer than needed.
Thank you for listening to this sample of FU. If you'd like to find out where the story goes, please make a pledge on our Kickstarter page today. Thank you.